You know, we always talk about the big famous battles, right? Badr, Uhud. But have you ever stopped to think about what happened in the year between them? It definitely wasn't a time of rest. Nope. This was a super intense year of strategic moves where the new Muslim community really started to act like a nation.
So you pull off this impossible victory at Badr. It's a miracle, no doubt. But what happens the next day? You know, once the dust settles and the reality kicks in, how do you actually manage the consequences of winning? Because victory changes everything, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into.
All right, so let's jump right in. The very first thing that happened after Badr was this massive shift in the whole power structure of Arabia. Suddenly, the Muslims weren't just this small, persecuted group anymore, not by a long shot.
Think of it like this. After Badr, everyone in the region had to completely redraw their mental maps. This small community in Al-Madeenah, which most people probably wrote off as just a bunch of refugees, was now a serious power to be reckoned with. I mean, they had just defeated the regional superpower. That changed the entire game.
And what's fascinating is how this victory split the reactions right down the middle. On one side, you had these smaller, weaker tribes. They looked at what happened and were just awestruck and a little scared, probably. For many of them, it was a clear sign to join the Muslims. But then you have the other side of the coin, the big players, like Makkah. For them, this wasn't a miracle, it was a nightmare. They saw their dominance slipping away and decided they had to stamp out this new power before it got any bigger.
So the key takeaway here is pretty stark. Success created a brand new kind of problem. Al-Madeenah went from being a refuge to being the center of a new political force. And that painted a giant target right on its back. So what do you do when you have a target on your back? Do you just wait to be attacked? Nope. The leadership in Al-Madeenah went on the offense, not with battles, but with strategy. They adopted this policy of proactive, preemptive defense. The whole idea was to use good intelligence to shut down threats before they even had a chance to get started.
And the first big test of this new strategy came from a tribe called the Banu Salim. Now, try to see it from their perspective for a second. They're thinking, okay, the Muslims just fought this huge, draining battle at Badr. They've got to be exhausted, right? Weakened. So they started getting their forces together, planning a sneak attack on a city they thought was an easy target.
Boy, did they miscalculate. Big time. Just 7 days, a single week, after getting back from Badr, the Prophet himself was leading an army right back out the gates to meet them. The move was so fast, so utterly unexpected, that the Banu Salim forces just broke. They scattered and ran for the hills without a single fight. Just like that, the threat was gone. No bloodshed.
And this is where you see the genius of the strategy. The Muslims captured 500 of their camels. Now, that's not just a nice prize. For a desert tribe, camels are everything. They're your economy, your transportation, your ability to make war. Losing 500 of them, that's a devastating blow. But it was more than that. It was psychological warfare. The word got out across all of Arabia, don't mess with Al-Madeenah. They're not weak, they're watching you, and they are incredibly fast.
And they kept up the pressure. There was another patrol, the Bahrain expedition, that did pretty much the same thing. No fighting, just a strong show of force. It was all about deterring would-be attackers, establishing control simply by being present and showing they were ready for anything.
Okay, so the smaller tribes were getting the message, but what about the main enemy, Makkah? They weren't going to be scared off so easily. They decided they needed to test Al-Madeenah's defenses for themselves, which brings us to this really interesting little episode called the Flour Sack Raid.
So Abu Sufyaan gets together 200 horsemen, and they ride towards Al-Madeenah under the cover of night. This wasn't a full-on invasion. It was more of a probe. Hit them quick, do some damage, see how they react. They torched some date palm trees, which was a real in-your-face kind of move, and then they turned to run. But they got spotted, and the chase was on, immediately.
And this is how the raid got its funny name. The Makkans are fleeing, but the Muslims are gaining on them, fast. To get away, they had to lighten their horses. So what do? You start chucking your heavy supplies. And what they were carrying were these big, heavy bags of flour called As-Saweeq. Imagine having to dump your food just to escape. It was pretty much the definition of a desperate, humiliating retreat.
So yeah, Abu Sufyaan and his men escaped. But the mission itself, a total failure. The whole point was to find a weakness, to prove Al-Madeenah was vulnerable. Instead, the message they brought back to Makkah was the exact opposite. These guys are always ready. Their response time is scary fast.
But you know, the threats weren't all about armies and tactics. To survive, you need more than just a good defense. Sometimes the biggest tests are personal, they're spiritual. And this next story, it's a profound one. It really gets to the very heart of where this new nation's real strength came from.
So picture this. During another expedition, a sudden, heavy rainstorm just drenches everyone. The prophet finds a spot under a tree to rest and hangs his wet clothes up to dry. In the process, he gets separated from his companions. So he's there, all by himself, completely alone and totally vulnerable.
And an enemy warrior, a man named Dothor, sees his chance. He sneaks up, draws his sword, and stands right over the prophet, who is completely unarmed. And he asks this question, just loaded with menace. "O Muhammad, who's going to protect you from me now?"
And the prophet's response was just one word. But what a word. With total unshakable certainty, he just says, Allah. And in that instant, something incredible happens. The warrior is so stunned, so overwhelmed, that his sword just drops from his hand. The prophet calmly picks it up, and now the tables have turned. He asks the man, "And who will protect you from me?" And the warrior? He had nothing. He was completely defeated, just in awe of what he'd witnessed.
This moment was so important, it's actually mentioned in the Quran. It's the ultimate lesson in what's known as tawakkul, that complete and total reliance on God. Think about it. When there's no army, no friends, no weapon to protect you, what's left? True faith. And that becomes the only shield you need. This kind of spiritual strength, this resilience, it was just as important for the survival of the nation as any military victory.
Okay, so let's shift gears back to the strategic chessboard. With these direct military pokes and prods failing, the conflict starts to morph into something else, an economic war. And the Muslims began to squeeze Mecca where it hurt the most, its trade lifeline.
So you have to understand, Mecca's whole economy was built on these huge trade caravans that went north to Syria. But now, that main route was basically shut down by the Muslims in Al-Madeenah. This put the Quraysh in a really desperate spot. So they tried to get clever. They planned a whole new secret route way out east through Nejd and Iraq. It was longer, way more difficult, but they felt they had no choice.
But here's the thing. Al-Madeenah's intelligence game was on another level. Word of this secret caravan got back to the prophet. He immediately sent out a small unit, just 100 men, led by Zayd ibn Haritha. They moved fast, and they caught the caravan completely by surprise at a watering hole called Al-Qarda. The guards and guides on the caravan just panicked. They dropped everything and ran, without even trying to fight.
And the prize was massive. This caravan was loaded with silver and goods worth 100,000 dirhams. That is a staggering amount of money. For Mecca, this was a crippling financial hit and a huge blow to their morale. The message was now crystal clear. There is no safe way for you to do business. The economic blockade was working.
So, as we wrap this up, it's so clear that the year between Badr and Uhud was anything but a quiet one. It was really a masterclass in how to build a nation while you're under constant threat, and it all boiled down to a few key ideas. First, vigilance, always being ready. Second, intelligence, using information to act before your enemy does. And finally, holding it all together was that deep, unshakable trust in Allah as the ultimate source of protection. These weren't just battlefield tactics. These were the very pillars that allowed this new nation not just to survive, but to set the stage for everything that was to come.